Hey y'all, Boogie Night here, how's it going? And I know, this is not my usual trilby, but since this movie took place in the South, with the exception of my southern accent, which is going to come out quite frequently during the course of this review, this is the most southern thing that I own. Now, this particular flick has been on my radar for quite some time. Back when I was dating the Inconceivable, she really enjoyed this movie. She would quote certain scenes from it, to which I would just stare at her blankly like, what are you talking about? So when she found out, my little dark secret, she strongly encouraged me to go check it out for myself. And then when her mom and her aunt came to visit us, they would be doing the same thing, and I would be just left there in the dark. So they started being like, what are you doing? Why haven't you seen it? Go check it out for yourself. So here I am, 3 years later, reviewing it for the Sonic Boogie Project. I was going to watch it solo, but of course my hill-running partner, Koala, was more than accommodating to join me on this journey. And the movie we watched was Steel Magnolias. Now, Steel Magnolias was a 1989 comedy drama movie directed by Herbert Ross and was actually a film adaptation to Robert Harling's 1987 play of the same name. Now, I didn't know this during the time I was watching this movie, but it turns out the play was based upon a true story involving Harling and his sister, which throws the play and in turn the movie into a completely different light. Now, I liked this movie. It was not what I expected. But what it came down for me was the immersion factor. I found this movie to be quite immersive, which is rare for me to be immersed by a comedy movie. But I will go into the reasons why I like that during the course of this review, and of course leaving the plot to the end so people who want to watch this movie can avoid that for the spoiler purposes. And I do encourage y'all to go see it. I mean, it's on Amazon Prime, it's on Netflix, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. It's worth it, it really is, but I strongly encourage y'all to go into it with an outside opinion on it. And once again, these are just my thoughts on the matter, so let's talk about why I like this movie. But first, before I go into the two big categories of why I really enjoyed this, I want to talk about the one thing that I'm not saying I disliked, but it was the one thing that detracted from the overall immersion factor. Now, most movies have jumps through time. This could be 1 year later, 6 months later, 2 years before, but there's some kind of segue during the course of that, like even if it's just a little blurb at the bottom of the screen saying how much time has elapsed. This movie didn't. I mean, it was literally a flash cut from 1 year to 1 year, and maybe a flash cut to 2 years later, and you don't know that for a little while. You could be thinking to yourself, oh, this is the next night, or maybe this is a week later, or maybe it's the same day. And all of a sudden, a new character is thrust into your midst, or you find out X, Y, and Z has happened, and you have no idea. So Quo and I were kind of scratching our heads with each other going, so this happened, this happened, this happened, so I guess it's X amount of years later. So I think that could have been a little smoother. Like, just put a subtitle at the bottom saying it. It's the easiest way to show how much time has elapsed and keeps the immersion factor alive. But if that's the only thing I found fault with this movie, let's talk about the big two. And before I go into my very, very favorite part of this movie, I want to talk about the characters, because oh my god, I know most characters make the movie, but sometimes some movies, like say Suspiria, the atmosphere makes the movie, or in Blade Runner, the action scenes make the movie. With this, the entire focus was on the cast of characters. Now, there were 6 main characters, but before I talk about the latter two, I want to talk about the big 4. And that was Trovy, Malin, Clary, and Weza. And the reason I want to focus on them at first was because they were all, I wouldn't say childhood friends, but they had this blend of strengths and weaknesses which fed off each other. They were almost yin-yangs of each other. And just here's a big example, is Trovy, she had this, always trying to find the bright side of things. There was always this air of trying to recognize the silver lining, no matter if she was playing against a stacked deck. And it was really kind of joyful, so if somebody's down in the mud, she's going to be the first person to cheer them up. And the counter to her was Malin, who I'm not saying she was cynical, but in certain scenes, you kind of wanted to say, you're wrong, but then later on, you realize she's just hyper-logical to the point it kind of clouds her judgment. So between Truvy and Malin, it was almost a yin-yang factor. Then thirdly, you had Clary, who was kind of like Truvy in some sense, but she was more of the prankster of the group. She was always finding ways to crack jokes and to make people feel better, even at the cost of some other people. But it was really funny to see her in action, because it was kind of like stepping on a mine. Something would just pop out of nowhere, and she'd be like, and you'd be like, well, that happened, for instance. It was just very well done. But the big counter to Clary, if not all of them, was Weeza. Weeza was definitely like, she had a chip on her shoulder. She had a rough past, but she carried it with her like a bag of bricks. Nothing ever satisfied her. Everything, she was just like, oh my God, this, you know. If Truvy was trying to make a positive point, or Clary was trying to make something positive, Weeza would be the first person to throw it back in their faces and be like, no, you're an idiot. I mean, she had a beef with Truvy's, was it Truvy or Malin? Malin's husband. The entire course of the movie, that there could not be one single celebration without Weeza throwing it in their faces. And even when Weeza was in a positive mood, she still carried it behind this kind of bitchy self, being like, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm not happy at all. But later on towards the end, you saw a very, very, very minor character development of her. Which showed positive light, because I wouldn't say Truvy, Clary, and Malin had character involvement, because they always kind of had that characteristic behind them from the get-go. But it didn't detract from the overall feeling, because you had this bond that only happened among long-term friends. So it would be like if you put me and Harkov in the same room with maybe one of the friends he grew up with, one of the other friends that I knew from long ago, in that room, and we all just kind of had this natural bond that flowed. It was just completely, it felt organic. Now, secondly, I wouldn't say, they're not minor characters, but they didn't have the same bond as the Big Four, as I'm going to call them. You had Malin's daughter, Shelby, played by Julia Roberts, and she was kind of along the lines of Truvy as well. I wouldn't call her blissfully naive, but she wanted to find joy in as much as she could in life. She had some stuff she was going through. Once again, I'm going to go through that during the course of this plot. But she was trying to live with what she was going through, what was disabling her per se. And it was definitely the counter to Malin, because there's this one scene, which I'm not going to talk about too much, is Malin is arguing with Shelby quite a while, and Shelby's trying to be like, look, Mom, I understand where you're coming from, but I want to be joyful. I want to be happy. I want to have this moment where just everything is right with the world. And you see that through her eyes, and you want to feel as she does, even though you have Malin's hyperlogic in the back of your mind going, this ain't going to go well, this ain't going to go well. But the last character I want to talk about is Anel. And the reason I want to do that is because since you have the Big Four and Shelby, and of course Shelby being Malin's daughter, she has that kind of tie to the Big Four. Anel was, when the movie starts, Anel is just arriving in the small Louisiana town where it takes place. And she had kind of the strangest of involvements, but it was definitely involvement. When she starts working at Truvy's beauty salon, she starts out as clumsy and very reserved, then she's got this dark past behind her that you find out pretty early on. But later on, she goes through a bad boy phase, which which you don't know about until she recaps it about, I don't know how many months or years after the fact, but it's in passing dialogue, and then she goes from the bad boy movement to this very hyper Christian state, which kind of stays with her for the duration of the course of the flick, and kind of puts her at fault with certain characters and certain scenes, but she also becomes comfortable with Shelby and Truvy and Malin and Clary, and she almost develops a certain bond. I think it was with Weeza, that Weeza actually wants to go see Anel at the beauty salon. So it's really kind of cool to see the character involvement with the big four plus Shelby, while still kind of having this strange little involvement of her own. And so that's what I really liked about the characters. But here's the big thing that I really liked the most, and that was the mood. I mean, when you hear comedy drama, what comes to mind? I mean, is it really more of a dramatic plot point, but it's mostly addressed in comedic format? This movie was a roller coaster that would go from comedy to drama, and just back and forth, punctuated by certain scenes, whether it was a flash forward, whether it was a flashback. But I forget who said it, but this is one of those movies where the drama hits you right in the heart, right in the feels, and you're choking up, and it turns into this I'm not crying, you're crying moment. And then seconds later, something's happening that's going to make you laugh. And I really like that about that, because it almost reminds me of a slice of life, is that somebody's going through something, like Shelby's going through her stuff, or maybe something's going on with Truvy and her husband, or Malin and her husband, or something's going on throughout the town and whatnot. It really kind of struck me in a good way, and it was just very immersive to me in that facet, because, you know, with me going through some stuff, which I've talked about before in previous entries, you know, it's hard to kind of find focus, and hard to kind of find that, my God, it's cloudy out. Hard to kind of find that way to cheer yourself up, but I do have friends and family that are quick to punctuate whatever drama that I'm going through with moments of hilarity and comedy. So that's what immersed me the most. I mean, I would not go into this thinking like, oh, I'm going to be laughing the entire time, because you won't. There is cases of mood whiplash, though, throughout the course of this flick, so don't be surprised if you're laughing in 1 second, your chin hits your lap like, wait, what? Oh, what, huh? Because that happened on numerous occasions. But, I mean, that's life for you. Not everything is flowers and sunshine. There are moments of sadness. There are moments of negativity. But with the characters, they could rely on each other, and that's kind of where I postulate the title Steel Magnolias comes from, where you can be delicate like a magnolia flower, but hard as steel. And that's friendship, you know? It's a combination of both delicacy and hardness, at least in my opinion. I could be wrong, I'm shooting from the hip here. So, with those things out of the way, let me talk about the plot in a nutshell. This is going to be spoiler heavy, and once again, I encourage y'all to go check it out for yourselves. So, if you are and you don't want to know what the plot is, switch off now. Anyway, so the movie opens with Anel arriving in town. She'd only arrived there about weeks before. She's very shy, she's very clumsy, but it turns out it's Shelby's wedding day. So Truvy hires her on the spot to, you know, kind of coif her hair, kind of take care of business, and hires her immediately to just. It was very cute and carries that small town vibe to it. And then, of course, throughout the course, as you find out, Malin is trying to get the wedding organized. Her husband, I forget his name, but he was basically the Earl of the course of this movie. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Earl was a nickname that Quona came up with to kind of describe the silly, kind of, I'm not going to say stupid, but he was the guy that was kind of like, oh, there goes Earl acting up again. Don't mind Earl, he's drunk. That kind of thing. So Malin's trying to organize this for Shelby. You kind of sense Shelby has some backstory, some history going on. Hang on one second. It's getting way too dark in here. Oh, there's another first for that. I had to go open the window. I didn't want to be sitting here in the dark like Todd in the shadows. But anyway, you kind of sense something's going on with Shelby. Her husband, Jackson, he's kind of like, oh, you do want to marry me. And I'm kind of like, what, huh? It's clear that they love each other. And the family's concerned about what's happening. Like, are you sure that you want to get married to him? So even though he's a big-time lawyer in town, he's got this prominent history. So you don't know what's happening with that, and then at the same time, you don't know what's happening with Annelle. But as they're prepping for the wedding, and Shelby's getting her hair done, she seizes, and then it finds out that she has type 1 diabetes and was going through, her insulin was too high. And that's when it kind of throws you into the inner conflict between Shelby and Malin, and the entire thing is like, how are you going to be able to take care of things as you're married? It's going to be a completely different experience. But Shelby goes through with the wedding, and then it flash cuts to, I think, 6 months down the road. You find it's around Christmas time. And then you find out more about Annelle's checkered past, about her ex-husband, whatever, disappeared. She was left broke, practically homeless, living in a boarding house. Later on, she starts dating this one guy that she meets at Shelby's wedding, has her own house, courtesy of, I think it was one of the big four. It was either Truvy or Malin. It was definitely not Weza. And things are happy-go-lucky, things are going well. And then you find out that Shelby is pregnant. And that is when you see the big conflict between her and Malin. Because Malin, being very logical, she's like, well, maybe the baby's going to have diabetes. What happens if you can't take care of yourself? And if Jackson's out traveling for work, or he's on a big move somewhere, what's going to happen to you? What's going to happen to the child? And that's when you see the big conflict between the two of them. But nevertheless, Shelby goes through with the pregnancy. And then it flash cuts again to with her being extremely pregnant. And it's just kind of back to normal, just them kind of joking about. And that's kind of where you see just the general life. I mean, it was a nice, pleasant moment between scenes, between the drama and whatnot. And then it flash cuts again to Shelby having given birth to baby Jackson, or Jax for short. But then you also find out that she's going through dialysis. We're back to the drama. And it's tough to watch because going back to the characters, you see the hurt reflected in their eyes. You see how Shelby is suffering but trying to make the best of the situation. And when you feel it, or at least I felt it, which goes back into the mood factor, goes back into the immersion factor, but it goes back into the character relations. And she needs to get a liver transplant. Luckily, she does get the liver transplant, and things are a success. Everything is going okay. Flash cut again. She's taking care of the baby. Everything's good in town. Annelle's doing her happy, hyper Baptist religious thing. But then Shelby has a very strong seizure while looking after baby Jax. After calling her husband, she's rushed to the hospital and she's put on life support. Long story short, they have to take her off life support. It was very tough to watch. The last few moments were definitely when the hurt came home. And I will be honest, I mean, I kind of choked during the course of that scene. Because you see the look on the family's face, not just Malin and her husband, but on Jackson's face, on the rest of the big four, on Annelle. Even as the newcomer, there was this bond between them. So it was so tough to watch, just seeing how Malin has to agree to pull the plug and see the family in mourning with each other. And then, I'm not going to call it the penultimate scene, but the big scene at the end is when Malin finally opens up to her emotions to the rest of the four, to Clary, to Truvy, to Weza, to Anel. Anel essentially, towards the end of the movie, was kind of inducted as an honorary member of the Big Four. Because they work together and whatnot. Anyway, and Malin finally cracks and lashes out about how upset she is about Shelby dying. And why not? It makes perfect sense. I mean, if somebody close to me died, I would be at complete wit's end. I would have completely lose it. But during the course of this sadness, Malin's screaming like, what do I do? What do I do? I could just hit somebody. And this was kind of like a big mood whiplash, but it segues back into the relationship. She's like, you can hit Weza. Here, I'll hold her. Punch Weza right in the kissing. You can be the first woman in the South to ever say, I punched Weza Boudreaux. And Weza, of course, is freaking out over this entire interchange, because since Weeza's always had a target painted on her back, she's kind of been the butt monkey to most of the jokes, mainly from Clary. It was just kind of funny, because you knew something was going to happen, yet it was not just going to stay in this very sad scene, but, it was just a cool little way to show the cheering up with each other, how they can find solace in each other, even at the cost of somebody else's expense temporarily. And then after that, flash forward to later on, I'm not sure how much later on, it's Easter, and Anel is extremely pregnant. And her significant other, I forget his name, I think it was Bobby, whatever. Life is kind of back to normal, but in a very touching scene, they're asking, like, well, what are you going to name your baby? And she's like, well, if it's a girl, Shelby. Like, what if it's a boy? She jokes like, Shelby. But it was very heartwarming after the climax of this movie to see things kind of winding down with each other. And she actually goes into labor during the final scene, and she's driven away, and everybody's waving at her as she's being rushed off to the hospital to give birth. And it just shows how life returns to normal in that town. So that was the plot in a very loose nutshell. I mean, there's a lot of underlying plots, like conflict with each other, conflict within, but I've already spoken about that. So all in all, go check this movie out. I really do encourage it. But once again, as I said, you've got to be prepared for the pitfalls. You've got to go into it with an outside mindset. But, of course, those are just my opinions. I want to know what your opinions are. Let me know in the comments below. So, anyways, with that being said, before I call it a very, very rainy day, if you like the Sonic Boogie project and you want to check in more, I do have a Twitter account as well as a public Discord channel, and links to both of those are in the description below, as well as a link to my Twitch channel. And if you have some money you want to dispose of and don't feel like throwing it in the dumpster, my Patreon account. So, of course, with that being said, y'all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you on the flip side, alright? Peace.